Connecticut Land Conservation Council, and this is our 13th, if you can believe it, our 13th session from our series of Conserving Land by Staying Connected, our online programming series that we quickly put in place after the postponement of the conference. Today we are so excited to have Connie Manes, who is going to do a presentation on board governance during the COVID-19 crisis. And this topic emerged from our previous conversations with many of you. And that has been the goal of our programming all along, which is to continue to be responsive to your needs and interests. And we hope that it has been helpful to you. So welcome everybody, and I have to apologize in advance. I'm going to scoot off at 1 o'clock for a Governor's Council on Climate Change meeting that I need to attend. But you will be in the very good hands of Rebecca Dahl, our program coordinator, and Christina Hayden, our conference and communications coordinator. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, and thank you all again for coming. Have a wonderful day.
So hi everyone, thanks again for coming. As Amy mentioned, we're all becoming old pros at this by now. I did want to just set a few ground rules here before we get started with our presentation. As you know, that bottom toolbar, we've got a few handy tools there. On the bottom left corner, we've got the mute button. If you could make sure that you are on mute just by clicking on that mute icon, that little microphone there. We will also potentially mute you if you are creating a little bit of feedback. It just creates a distraction for the recording and of course for everyone listening here. Following along that bottom toolbar, there's the chat section. There's a little speech bubble icon. If you click on that, a chat window should come up. We're going to ask that any questions you have, whether it be related to the material Connie is about to present, or if you have any technical difficulties, to please feed those into the chat. Just type them right in and hit enter. We will be monitoring that and sending those questions over to Connie, as well as helping you as best as we can. And then last but not least, we do expect a large number of people on this call, like many of our others. So to prevent any distractions, I'm going to ask that right now we all just stop our video by clicking on that little camcorder icon that's to the right of the mute button on the bottom left corner of your toolbar. Other than that, thanks for joining us, and we'll go ahead and turn it over to Connie.
Great, well, thank you, Rebecca. And I just wanted to mention to you all that I'm screen sharing, and for whatever reason that prevents me from actually seeing the chat. So I have people helping me out when you do post something in chat, but for those of you who have quickly mastered the idea of private chat, if you send me private messages, it's unlikely that I'll see them until later on in the presentation. So just a heads up there. I've been beginning all of my calls and presentations with, the general question, how are you doing? Which is not easy over like a meeting of 37 people. Myself, I feel very fortunate to live here in the Northwest Connecticut Hills. It's pretty spacious. I have 3 online learners in my house. That might ring, that might strike a bell with some of you. I've got 2 teenagers, and we've made probably 9 to, I don't know, say 20 batches of brownies so far. The teenagers are stir crazy and lonely. They resent that they can't be with their friends. They're spending too much time in front of a screen, and so am I. So I drive maybe once a week, and I'm taking long walks from my front door, but find that the spring has been really beautiful, including today. So thank you all for being here with us on this pretty day. And what I've really found is that while we might be experiencing similar things, and some may be doing some of the things that I'm doing, no one is having exactly the same experience, and it's been tough for everyone in different ways. So I'm very hopeful that you and your families are healthy and safe and remain so. And just want to color this particular presentation with the idea that, flexibility and understanding of people is really necessary during these times. So we scheduled this session in response to questions coming in from across the state about governance, and we will be talking today about meetings, how to accomplish them now that we can't do so in person, and also touch a little bit on record keeping and file sharing, some questions about liability insurance, and nail down the must-dos that we will be focusing on during this time while imagining some can-dos for boards. So thank you for filling out the poll, which Rebecca was kind enough to put up on the screen about who's on the line. I don't know if you all can see this, but what I am seeing is that, you know, we have a few who are the president of their boards, 10 more people who are on the board of a land trust or a conservation organization, 5 executive directors, and 1 other staff member. So thank you for participating in that poll. It's good to know who's on the line, and we can stop sharing that poll. Or maybe I can I? All right. Okay, so I hope you're familiar with this particular photo. Did you ever try to imagine yourself in this image when you were younger? I always thought it was so clever, right? And now it's kind of like life imitates art. So I once wished that I could be looking around like the folks in the Brady Bunch, and now I'm not sure how happy I am about it. But technology has certainly been wonderful in helping us to do what we need to do remotely. And at this point, I think most of us have probably joined Zoom or another online meeting. But is it okay to meet like this as a board? What are the determining factors? What are the best practices? And what are some tips for running one of these? So let's talk about board meetings first. I know we have questions about annual meetings, and we'll get to those later on, so because some of the same concepts are relevant. We had the question prior to this session that our bylaws, the bylaws of this organization, say votes are conducted by those who are, quote, present and voting, unquote. So that organization decided that present can include virtually, but was worried about what laws they might be flouting. So the analysis of what you can do is really case specific. As you can see, no one size fits all. There are usually options and built-in flexibility, but it's very much case by case. So you need to check first and foremost in 2 places. You need to look at the state law, which for us is the Connecticut Revised Non-Stock Corporations Act, and I've given a citation and can send you any of these if you can't find it online later. And you need to check your own organizational documents, including your bylaws, but sometimes also your certificate of incorporation. Also, it's a really good idea once you've read for yourself and, you know, decided what you think your documents and the state law says, to check with your attorney and make sure that your interpretation jibes with how an attorney might interpret that. And this is a good time for me to say that I am not coming at you today as an attorney. I do have a law degree, but I don't practice in the state of Connecticut. And the disclaimer here is that this discussion is not intended to be legal advice. So the state law says, and here's the citation, section 33-1095, which is the section covering meetings, in paragraph little b, unless the certificate of incorporation or bylaws provide otherwise, the board of directors may permit any or all directors to participate in a regular or special meeting by, or conduct the meeting through the use of, any means of communication by which all directors participating may simultaneously hear each other during the meeting. And here's the kicker: a director participating in a meeting by this means is deemed to be present in person at the meeting. So there's your answer. It's not that you even needed to decide that or twist the law. The law actually considers a director participating in a meeting where all can hear and be heard simultaneously to be present at the meeting. That being said, the goal is really to have an engaged board of directors that are fully informed and deliberate in their decision making, especially in a time of crisis. So this is why we find legal and bylaws requirements like the need to provide notice, the need for a quorum, and the need for all to hear and be heard. Without this, an organization might fall into a practice of minority rule, which is where decisions are made by a few people as opposed to the entire board. This is really a no-no for private charities, and it's also why keeping a full record of the proceedings is important to demonstrate that there is full and robust discussion and participation in the decision-making. So if you find that you are able to do virtual meetings, pay attention to notice and the provision of complete information, including ensuring that folks know how to participate in the meeting, much as CLCC sent out links to tips for participating along with this meeting link. And make special effort to ensure that all board members receive any supplemental documentation and have time to read it prior to discussion and decision making. Third, take the opportunity to invite discussion and input prior to calling a vote. Assure that voting adequately allows time to cast both yay and nay votes, as well as abstentions. I think we're a little premature. Actually, we can do the poll. We can do the poll while we're listening. So we've got a poll out there that is asking about if you've had a board meeting, how did you conduct it? So just a note on quorums. State law says that you can have a quorum as low as 1/3 of the directors. But in my experience, folks have written into their bylaws that about half of the board needs to be there for a quorum, or a majority, that is. For voting, state law says that a positive vote by a majority of the directors needed for a quorum, right? So that could be as many as one more than 1/3 is needed in order to vote. But no matter what the forum, whether you're doing this on Zoom or on a conference call, ensure as full participation as possible, provide instruction and support for attending, send your materials prior to meeting, and the Accreditation Commission, just to make a note, suggests that that means sending notice at least 7 days prior to the meeting and sending supplemental materials at least 3 days prior to the meeting. So we have got 22 who answered the question if your organization has had a board meeting within the past 6 weeks. And it looks like the majority of those tried to do that on Zoom or video conference, and a couple did it on a conference call. Okay. All right, great. So let's take conference calling first, although you will find that the rules around conference calls and video calls are somewhat similar. So I'm expecting that, quite a few of you probably have done a board conference call or a board meeting where calling in was an option. This was a common practice even before COVID-19, and it's still useful. It's maybe even better now that we don't have to do like the top photo and huddle up and yell into a unit in the middle of a table, and instead can be, out wherever we need to be, including walking the dog. Conference calls are covered by state law, so that's section 33-1095, which we read in the prior slide, allowing that if a person can hear everyone and be heard, then that counts as being present, is in effect here. And many organizations put this explicitly into their bylaws. It's not required that you do, but it does clarify that this is allowable. And so here's a sample provision from a Connecticut land trust. So as far as conference calls, I have used freeconferencecall.com, but there are many, many providers. I was going to have just for the the usefulness of creating a list, people who have tried and used other providers and found them to be good, to post that in the chat. So you may want to do that if you have a favorite. And some practices, some best practices, which go to the concepts that we discussed previously, which are really ensuring the fullest participation and being able to demonstrate this through documentation, would include doing a roll call for attendees. I don't know if you've had the experience of being on a conference call and you just hear everyone beeping in, but you're really not sure who joined. And then there's that awkward, you know, kind of like, who just joined the call? And then once you get rolling, it's very hard to interrupt and, like, you know, make sure that that you've got everyone, you know, you've captured everyone and know who's on the line. So one best practice might be to know who you're expecting and then do a roll call once you get going. Make reference within the conference call to the agenda and materials. With a conference call, you're not going to have the opportunity to screen share like we're doing, but if you can call specific attention to materials that you've distributed prior to the call, then that will be helpful to orient people to what, you know, to the discussion. Another good practice is to ask people who are speaking out to identify themselves prior to adding their comment, because it's very difficult sometimes to to decipher who's talking, and you may not have memorized everyone's voice. So it is helpful to have people, you know, say their name before their comment. Voting can be done in a number of ways. You can, you know, you could just ask people to call it out. Sorry, I'm dark. Or call out their vote in turn. And really, this is going to depend. In my experience, many votes in a land trust are unanimous, not very contested. And so in the context of a vote that you don't expect to be contentious, you might just ask everyone to say aye and, you know, hear a chorus. Stop and say any opposed, hear, you know, a few people or none at all, and then ask for abstentions as well. But if there's a contested vote or if it looks like it's going to be close, it might be better to do a roll call. And then finally, most of these conferencing options have, conferencing services have options to record the call. So recording the call and keeping that digital copy may be a good idea in terms of your record keeping. Okay, I know I'm moving quickly through these things, and there is a place where we can pause and take some questions that are specific to the situations you're facing in a slide or two. So video conference wise, the state law and the bylaws provisions are pretty similar. Again, like conference calls, video conferences are governed by that state law section 33-1095. And some people choose to make it explicit in their bylaws that video conferencing would be acceptable. I have seen that people are using Zoom. A lot of people are using Zoom, but also they're successfully using Google Hangouts, which is, I think, also called Meet or Hangouts Meet or Skype. I tried free conference calls video function. I didn't love it, but that's another option as well. And like we did with the conference call service, maybe it would be helpful for CLCC and for you as colleagues if people who have had a good experience with a certain service make a recommendation in their chat. Best practices for video conferencing. There are tons of tip sheets online, and you know, they're all different versions of the same kind of stuff. But generally speaking, you're going to want to limit distractions as best possible. It's a really good practice and good social etiquette to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Use a headset when you're in a crowded space. Turn off your video when you're moving around or doing something distracting. If you avoid video backdrops, then you're going to avoid the situation like I've had periodically, and I have to keeping an eye on it, where your face goes really dark, and that can be scary or off-putting to people. So if you're using video, try not to be with the window in the background like me. And the host can control this to a certain extent. So if you're planning a meeting, consider whether or not you want to use some of the functions that are customarily available. including muting participants when you admit them to the meeting, having the control to be able to mute everyone out during the meeting and then selectively turn them back on. And I believe that you can also, when you set up the meeting, not allow video, which can be an issue if the meeting is a large group of people. It can, I'm told, interfere with connectivity and the picture. And so you don't want people freezing or looking glitchy. Aside from that, meeting-wise, like with the conference call, you want to make sure that you have a really good record of attendance. It's a little bit easier with video conferencing because you can manage participants, so you can look and see who's actually on the line. Again, it's a good idea to know prior to the call who you're expecting, but then you would check while you were on to see who actually attended and see if there are any people who you didn't expect. You can use screen sharing like we are to share the agenda and to put up on the screen relevant materials that you might want to take a look at. So a good example of that might be if you were considering an acquisition, you would certainly want to put up on the screen share maps and photos and potentially a document that captures all of the reasons that a particular property meets your project selection criteria, those kinds of things that you would usually have either distributed prior to the meeting or around the table while you were discussing an acquisition. So that's just one example. With voting, so that's interesting. It's an interesting puzzle to figure out how to vote when you're on a video conference call. I think some of the same principles are at play here as with a teleconference call, which is that if you're not really expecting a contested vote, if it's a really a minimal matter, maybe like the adoption of board minutes or something like that, you could certainly ask people to shout it out. You could also do a vote using chat, which depending on your number of board members may be more or less cumbersome. You could do a roll call. And a vote that seemed particularly important, you could just call people one by one to give their vote either in chat or using the microphone function. And you might try a hand raise if, for something like the minutes as well. Although what you do want to do is, like the conference telephone call, you want to make sure that you provide the opportunity for people to cast a yay note, pause, let that happen, a nay note, and then an abstention if they want to. And again, most of these services do have an option so that you can record the call. I do want to encourage you to relax and have some fun with it. Embrace the humor if you can. There are often cameos where pets walk into the picture or a family member might walk by. These are your colleagues and they might really appreciate that humor and relatability. Don't feel like you have to be the expert. None of us trained for this, just like our poor teachers who are now doing the online learning. But do plan and try to be thoughtful about what you want to accomplish in the meeting. And think about things like how many people will be on the call and what that means logistically for how you want to try and encourage discussion and accomplish voting. All right, so I have a slide up about the imperfect world, which we know we all live in. Some common uh-ohs that happen, particularly with board meetings, is that documents are unavailable until shortly before or at the meeting. And in this kind of situation, just like a physical meeting, my advice is always to allow the board full time to read and inspect the new document. Actually ask, does anyone need more time? And are we okay to proceed? Like, are we ready? And then document in your minutes that that document was distributed during the meeting, that time was allowed for the board to review it, and that the board felt that they could proceed with discussion and potential voting on the matter. Also, there could be trouble with the technology. I'm black again. I don't know how many of you had trouble with the technology when you did your Zoom board meeting calls. I think that it's helpful to practice, but even with practice, you may find, like we did today, that I was unable to share my screen and view the chat at the same time. So that was unexpected, but luckily, given that we were expecting the imperfect world, we have deputized someone to provide tech support during the call, and I'm really grateful that Rebecca and Christina are keeping an eye on things for me. You might want to have a plan B. So I know that not everyone has a laptop or a computer that has a camera, and so they may feel you know, they may be unable really to participate in a video conference. They might not have a microphone that works. And so when you're using a service like Zoom, make sure that you are able to also provide a dial-in number so people can use their phone to participate. And then in a real pinch, I've also seen it work to use a cell phone to call into that dial-in number and conference somebody and kind of put the cell phone next to the laptop. Not ideal, but have a plan B so that people can participate. And if you really can't figure it out, remember that it's always your option as a board to adjourn the meeting and have it another time. So I'm going to take a pause for some questions, and I'm hoping Rebecca will tell me what's coming up.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of great participation in the chat. Uber conference was another recommended line from Jordy and Ann. Cheryl has a question about recording the call. She says it seems like an option, but is it a best practice? She's not sure how board members may feel about being recorded.
Yeah, you know, that's interesting. I think that just because it's recorded doesn't mean that you're going to throw it up on YouTube. Your minutes are meant to be a record of deliberations, but certainly we don't put every single thing that happens in the meeting in the minutes. I think it's it's an interesting question to explore with your board, and also to think about what you might do with that recording afterwards. You know, given the concerns of your board. So if you're just storing them with your meeting minutes, if it's a place that you can go back to, if you need to prove something someday, you know, even, I guess, given that if it was something that ended up being the subject of a litigation, it's likely to be privileged anyway. I don't know, you know, I would say on balance, I would, just because it's available, I would save a recording of the meeting. But I would be interested in hearing what others think about that.
Other than that, I don't see any other questions coming in. Oh, maybe one just came in right now. Kathleen makes a good point that you can always vote by poll, is another good way to capture that. And we have a note from Jordy saying, we found that phones have more consistent audio connections than computer audio. For people with low bandwidth, if they call in on a phone, you can still hear them even if the video freezes, like you suggested. Mm-hmm. And there's a follow-up question. Can a recording take place of written minutes?
I don't know that I would do that. And the reason is that I just think for ease of, for the ease of going back and finding information and also distributing it to your directors, it just seems to me so much more convenient to summarize board proceedings in a written document like the minutes that we are used to seeing, distributing those in draft form and having those adopted than, you know, having board members have to listen to a recording or watch it and adopt those as some form of minutes. It's not really the same thing. Minutes and the recording of the call are not really serving the same purpose, because minutes are a summary. So I would do both, but you might use your recording to check back while you were drafting the minutes. And I know some organizations, even prior to COVID-19, used to record their board meetings. Even if they were meeting in person, they would use, one of those old school dictaphone recorders to record the meeting and help, jog their memories when preparing the minutes.
I think we are clear on questions here, Connie.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on. So we also did have some questions about, how to take action without a meeting, which some people say, can I take an email vote? Action by written consent is rarely, using paper certificates anymore. But this has been around for quite some time. And is allowed by state law. So the citation is section 33-1097, if you wanted to take a look at it. And what it says is that except to the extent that the certificate of incorporation or bylaws specifically require action by the board of directors to be taken only at a meeting, action may be taken without a meeting if each director signs a consent describing the action taken or to be taken and delivers it to the corporation. So one caution here, since robust discussion and debate and the opportunity to hear from your colleagues is not possible when doing an email vote, really, even if some discussion or commenting happens in the chain of emails around the vote, most people feel that actions by email work best to handle non-controversial or routine items of business that just can't wait until the next time that you could get a board meeting together. And I think that given our reliance on the use of technology, it's probably the case that it's easier now, even under time pressure, to get the board together to have a regular meeting and really get that full participation. But you might use it, for example, if you had to send a contract back to the state to accept grant funding, or you wanted to enter into a grant contract or something like that, and there was a deadline to get that in. Generally, what is recommended is that the action without a meeting, the thing that is consented to, which can be an email sent from your account saying yes or no, right? That the email itself states what the action to be taken is. This is not required, but this is a best practice, that the action should be clear. It could be in the form of a proposed resolution. It could come on an email that has supplemental documentation, and you need to get unanimous consent. So that means every single board member, not merely a majority or the majority of a quorum, like the requirements would be in a meeting. All right, so you want the contents, again, you want the consents to provide good documentation that directors are fully aware of what they were consenting to. And then you want to keep documentation of that vote. Again, not state law. The state law was revised actually to say that you didn't need a unique piece of paper for each and every vote, but best practices really are that you have documentation, maybe even in a chain of emails, that each and every director consented to the action being proposed. Okay, so a couple of other topics that we wanted to cover today. We had so many questions about annual meetings, and I think that this is maybe because many organizations do this mid-year. Maybe their fiscal years are coming to an end in June. Certainly the weather is nice, so it's a time that people will host their annual meetings if one of the functions of their annual meetings is to do outreach or educational programming. So these things are coming up and people are wondering, what do we do? And I had a poll here, I think, again, if you could help me, Rebecca. And then while we're getting that going. Okay, yeah. So how many of you with upcoming annual meetings have canceled, are considering doing it on Zoom, or it's really too early to make a decision on that? I'll give you a minute or two to answer. And the solution is really that there are a few options, most likely. But like for board meetings, you want to check your bylaws first for your quorum and voting requirements. State law provisions also govern annual membership meetings, and they can make figuring it out a bit of an interesting puzzle. But I want to encourage you to think about the purposes for your annual meeting before coming to a conclusion. And see, now that we have, I guess most of you have voted, a majority are considering doing it on Zoom, although a couple have canceled and some are holding out to see what might be possible. Maybe that's why you're on the line today. In any case, think about the purposes of your annual meeting. Why is it that you do one? Why would you want to do one, especially this year? Do you conduct your annual meeting in order to provide outreach, fundraising? Are you doing it in conjunction with programs and education? Do you do it to elect new directors, which I know many of you have clauses in your bylaws, maybe even in your certificate of incorporation that require you to have, the directors elected by your members at an annual meeting. So know that there are safety nets, first of all. Lightning will not strike if you don't meet. So if you cancel your meeting, you're going to be okay. And I'm just gonna close the poll so we can get back to the slide. Section 33, 1061D of the Non-Stock Corporations Law says that failure to hold your annual meeting does not affect the validity of corporate action, right? So lightning is not going to strike you down. Your organization does not have to dissolve if you don't hold an annual meeting. And there are provisions to cover action without a meeting. They're a little bit convoluted and they work in conjunction with your bylaws. So it's kind of, again, it's very case by case and would require some interpretation, probably checking with your attorney. Section 33-1091 allows the board the ability to fill vacancies on its board of directors with the vote of directors. So even if your bylaws specify that the directors are voted in by the members at the annual meeting, there are provisions that say if there's a vacancy, your board can fill that vacancy until such time as your members can meet and elect that director. There's also the provision 33-1085 that specifies that directors serve until their successors are elected and qualified. So if somebody's terming off, they should have been replaced with a new director, or their term should have been renewed in the annual meeting. Their term continues until such time as you can have an election. So all of those things are kind of safety nets and give you some options, really. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Flanders Nature Center and Land Trust, which had its annual meeting last week and used really a creative combination of both action without a meeting and having a meeting. So for their corporate business, where they elected directors, they found that they were able to do written balloting for the directors, and they had people send in and vote for directors. So that was their election process. But then on the side, they also did a virtual meeting where they were able to do some outreach, some reporting out on the condition of the organization, some celebratory stuff, and some awards. And so that was a really nice and creative way to handle the fact that we can't do meetings the way that we would ordinarily during these times. I want to just pause for questions about annual meetings because I know that that was a real concern.
Yeah, so Connie, there's a question in the chat. If you cancel the annual meeting, can you still approve the directors that were elected at next year's meeting, or how would you handle this otherwise?
So I think what that is saying is that the board of directors, the annual meeting was canceled. The board of directors filled the vacancies. And then next year you would have the members ratify those, you know, or it really wouldn't be a ratification. It would be the election of those directors at the annual meeting the following year. Yes, you could do that. And you wouldn't have to wait a year if you didn't want to, or you could, but you wouldn't have to.
That looks like that question was answered. Thanks, Anne. A few people are noting that they've either canceled their annual meeting at first, or they're still waiting to see which platform's best, or they plan to reschedule it via Zoom. There's a question here from Victor that says, if we expect about 60 to 70 people, would it be best to have the meeting by teleconference rather than Zoom?
So certainly if you do decide, Victor, to have a virtual, like a video conference, I would set it up so that the people are not joining with their own video cameras. I would be really worried that that would slow down the feed and also be distracting. And, you know, you would probably want to share screens rather than, you know, like share a presentation, I guess is what I'm saying, or only have a certain number of panelists from your organization visible on video so that it doesn't become, you know, really distracting. It might be a good option to do it as a conference call, but on the other hand, I don't know if that has the jazzy appeal that right now video conferences seem to have, although that's going to wear off, I think, at some point. So if you could find a creative way to do a conference call, you could do it that way. And again, I kind of would harken back to, you know, what are your main purposes? What do you hope to accomplish during that annual meeting? If your main concern is getting those directors on board, maybe a conference call would be great. If you want to use it for outreach and fundraising purposes, then you might consider something virtual that would include a program where you're screen shared or where people could see the smiling faces of representatives of your organization.
Connie, it looks like we have a question here. How do you have a vote in a big annual meeting on Zoom?
Right. So that's a toughie. And if you go to state law and you read about action without a meeting and the whole section that allows members to submit written votes and for there still to be, you know, in-person votes, it's really convoluted. I'm not really sure about the feasibility of having people vote for directors on a very widely attended virtual meeting. On the other hand, if your quorum requirement in your bylaws was very low, sometimes your bylaws state that the quorum for the annual meeting is the people that show up, right? I mean, that'd be great because no matter who shows up, you have a quorum, right? And then you're looking for a majority. You would just maybe want to make sure that the people who were voting were entitled to vote. So, you know, there are those concerns, but I guess what I'm really feeling is that it's likely that we are not completely compliant with state law often in our annual meetings if our practice has just been to get a whole bunch of people in the room and have that loud kind of endorsement for the candidates that you've picked or are renewing their terms. If you're just, you know, making it a celebration, then I think you could probably approximate that on a virtual meeting. If you wanted to be really careful and do it to the letter, it's going to take a little bit more thought, including, making sure that you have a full list of who is entitled to vote, maybe seeing beforehand, having a registration link that allows you to know that the people attending are actually members, and then thinking about whether or not you're going to meet those quorum and voting requirements if you've gotten them, if you've written them into your bylaws. So very case specific. I don't think it's easy to do, and that's why, I thought that Flanders' solution was very elegant. All right, are we ready to move?
We have one more question about bylaws changes. I think during the annual meeting, I'm looking for just a little more clarification there, maybe Anne, but.
Anne, if you hold that question, I do have a slide on amending bylaws coming up in just a few. So I wanted to say a word about proxies, but really a word only. Every once in a while, somebody asks the question about whether or not proxies would be helpful. Having a proxy is the practice of appointing somebody as your representative to cast your vote. So it really doesn't get around the logistics here unless, you wanted to try and do something like have everyone appoint, one person as their proxy and that person only is needed for that. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be a good workaround for your annual meeting and voting. There are questions occasionally about Robert's rules and how to follow them using video conferencing. The Land Trust Alliance actually has published a few guidance documents that are particular to COVID-19, and they address the question of Robert's rules, really saying that, unless you've specifically written into your bylaws that you need to follow Robert's rules, you really don't need to. And so while they can be really helpful in providing guidance, I'm sorry that I keep coming in and out. While they can be very helpful in providing guidance for a procedure, if you can't follow them to the letter, you really needn't worry, unless that is a part of your actual adopted business procedure. And then finally, a note on using the executive committee, which we didn't get a question about, but I saw some questions about, the questions that were posed to the Land Trust Alliance nationally. And so, should you be thinking about making use of your executive committee more regularly because of the feasibility of getting a smaller group of people together, really think about that, use that judiciously. Because you want to, as much as possible, engender full participation for your board. So I would use the executive committee in this time as really a planning body to help to set the agenda and figure out what the board needs to accomplish. Any action that is taken by the executive committee should be, and this is often written into the bylaws, the board should provide, the executive committee, that is, should provide notice to the board immediately following of any action that they have taken on behalf of the full board. And then the decision of that executive committee should be ratified at the next regular meeting of the board. So I think that's all I had to say about this slide, although I'm seeing maybe some chats coming in. I do get like a red light when people comment, so I think that's an indication that there may be a question.
Connie, I was actually just sharing the link for LTA's board governance document for COVID-19. We're also going to send those to you in a follow-up email. So
awesome, thank you, thank you. Okay, so so a few people asked about record keeping. I kind of want to focus on record keeping for the board, just for a minute. Because I think that it's particularly important now and also hard. So you do want to make sure that you keep a full record of the meeting, whether you're doing it by conference call, virtually, or back during the time that we were meeting physically together. And that includes putting actually putting in your minutes the methodology that you're using at the meeting. So if it was a meeting by Zoom, your minute should state, the meeting was conducted via Zoom technology, kind of providing that documentation that everyone could hear and be heard, right? You want the names of those in attendance. We're talking about meetings where everyone attends virtually, but if we get back to a point where there's physical meetings, then you do want to put in parens if one of your participants participated by conference call or by video, you want to be able to, to indicate that. Your minutes should also include what materials were distributed prior to and at the meeting. And then your minutes are going to bullet out and summarize the topics that were discussed and have a record of all motions, votes, and the results of those votes. And again, here's that, advisory saying, consider keeping as an accompaniment to those minutes and your record a recording of the call. So the way that that's going to look, looking down at the right-hand side of the screen, is that you're probably going to want to have a copy of your notice to the board. I usually just PDF it. A copy of your email that sent out the materials. And as you know, when you send an email and there are attachments, you can usually see what those attachments are. You want to have copies of all of those attachments. You want your agenda. Your agenda should include the links to your Zoom or to your conference call if you're using that technology. That's also really helpful, by the way, to your participants if they get an agenda and the link is right there. You might have things like committee reports. Again, these are the materials that you distribute, and so not everyone has these, but if you had written reports, committee reports, proposed resolutions, other supplemental materials, financial statements, maps, photos, those kinds of things. And then what you want to do, and I want to just differentiate number 4 and number 8 here. Usually when you're having a meeting, you're sending out draft minutes to be approved, but that would be for like the meeting prior, right? So you approve at that meeting the minutes from the meeting prior. Once those minutes are approved, you want to go back and add the approved minutes to the record of the board meeting prior. Hope that's clear. And then, a note on, because we got a question about emailing files back and forth and sort of, navigating the switch to file sharing online and recommended resources. I really think that this could be a workshop in its own. I invite you to post in chat which file sharing services you might be using in your organization. I've seen people use Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive now. I see people using Basecamp, which is more of like a project platform that allows for tasks and organizes communications as well as just documents. In my organization, I'm using GoToMyPC as a way to remotely tap into a desktop that is networked in the office while we're not in the office. So there's a lot of different solutions. And I think that at some point, if it makes sense to do more workshopping on record keeping, that would be a better place to kind of get into the intricacies of file sharing when what you need is collaborative document making, where something like a Google Drive where people can work in real time is very helpful, or whether you're talking about record keeping of static documents that you want to have available and also keep safe, where other file storage systems like Dropbox might be more helpful. All right, good to move on.
We did actually just have a quick comment from Cheryl that they do a shared Dropbox folder where all board members have access to the Dropbox folder, and they know that that's where they need to obtain the required meeting documents rather than sending out links and things. Is that okay?
I think that is okay. If the board is, if the full board is able to access and use that system and that's working, then that sounds like a good system.
Otherwise, I think we're good to keep moving, Connie.
All right, great. Okay, so we'll spend a moment on amending bylaws because I feel that some organizations may be considering whether changes are needed to their bylaws in response to COVID or what they now know. So, you know, this is going to drive some of us to revise our bylaws. And the relevant state law really does not require that bylaws be amended in the context of a membership meeting or in an annual meeting. But the reality is that many of us have put provisions requiring that in our bylaws. And I've seen that probably, you know, a majority of the time. So many of us, because of our corporate documents, are looking at a situation where we can't really amend our bylaws until, you know, they have been vetted and recommended by the directors as a result of a board meeting and then put before our members. So this would be something to check in your organizational documents. And it may be the case that you know, that you wait and adopt revisions to your bylaws at the next opportunity that you have to meet with your members in the context of an annual meeting or a membership meeting. You could do a special meeting to adopt bylaws. Would I bother, you know, calling a special conference call of the membership in order to amend the bylaws just so that you can do what you want to do, you know, this year? No, I don't think that I would bother amending the bylaws in a special meeting, but I would do it in the context of a planned and scheduled membership meeting. And that's just me. Again, I'm not acting as your attorney. I would check it with your attorney. And there may be some situations that would argue for the fact that you should do that and be extra careful, depending on your specific situation. But I think those fail-safes that allow us to act and allow us to do what's reasonable are going to cover us while we're going forward, as long as we are keeping the basic principles in mind of you know, including the people in the decision-making that need to be. Accreditation requirements, some of you may know, are that you review your bylaws periodically or at least every 5 years. And so, you know, it may be that as we come through COVID-19 that reviewing the bylaws and revising them and adopting some amendments is a worthwhile thing to do. And there's no reason you couldn't get started on it now. My experience is that it often takes many months to get through the review and revision of bylaws. And so by that time you might be ready to meet with your membership, if only they can adopt the amendments. Amending a certificate of incorporation, if you find that your certificate of incorporation has restrictive provisions that you'd like to change, that's even more convoluted. In that case, state law does mandate that your directors and then your members would adopt those amendments, and then after that it needs to be filed with the state. So we're talking about a longer process, one that you would certainly want to have the advice of your attorney as you made progress on that. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on is this idea that emergency provisions are allowed in your bylaws, and here the specific citation I think begins at section 33-1031, and these provisions, which you'd need to have in your bylaws if you wanted to use, but you know, maybe for the future, as you think about amending your bylaws, you would insert such provisions. They can allow for an emergency response that eases the requirements for quorum and notice, and even action by an organization when the regular requirements for quorum and notice and voting are impracticable due to an emergency. So this was mostly thought of as like a wartime response, emergency bylaws, but they would certainly be relevant here today. All right, coming into the end of the presentation here, we got some questions about insurance, and specifically the question was, most of us small land trusts, and here, you know, that was elaborated, no staff, no office, probably have limited liability exposure. But what should we be asking our agent and ourselves with respect to insurance and liability? What potential liabilities can a land trust incur either during or after the pandemic occurs, if any? And I would encourage you to reach out to your agent. I don't know that it is accurate to say, you know, insurance doesn't cover COVID-19, although that might be the case in some specific cases. But I think I would encourage you to talk with your agent about your current and your future activities. And here, you know, I put some notes on the slide. Your property insurance would cover people who get hurt out on your trails. I don't know if they would cover a claim made against you if somebody got COVID while out on your trails, but I would think that it might. Your workman's compensation is going to cover employee claims, even claims, what I'm hearing, that somebody got sick at work. And I'm going to put a caveat on that. Your directors and officers insurance covers your board. So any personal claims about your board in the context of their, you know, governance function. And then terra firma, of course, is still going to cover defense and enforcement. But all of this really comes colored with the idea that you really should be acting in accordance with you know, state guidelines, state orders, and public and professional guidelines here. So, you know, the governor's order goes through May 20th. It would, you know, I don't know how your insurance coverage would work if you decided to have an organization-sponsored gathering of more than 5 people at this time. I mean, that really, to me, would seem, you know, closer to, you know, not really being abreast of what guidelines we're supposed to be following right now. And also, since we're not really essential businesses here, I would be careful of requiring your workers to go into the office and take care to adopt procedures for their safety. So you want to look at what other people are doing. You want to be on the lookout for ways to mitigate the risk. Many of our land trusts have created special signage, certainly sent out communications about appropriate conduct on trails. They are monitoring to make sure that there aren't situations of overcrowding, you know, either that cause risk of illness or, you know, simply risk, you know, to property and persons using those trailheads and parking areas. So, and as things ease, think about how to best accomplish social distancing and plan for that as things open up. Think about ways to mitigate and avoid situations where there's touching of surfaces that may be touched by others. And so I'll just give you one example. I know a few organizations maintain community gardens, and they have been thinking about whether or not and how they can open. Usually, if they are making plans to open, they're thinking about, you know, no shared tools, the availability of hand sanitizer or hand washing facilities, and even thinking about whether implementing staggered shifts might be a good way to mitigate risk and to ensure the safety of people using their properties. Any questions there?
Connie, we've gotten just a couple questions come in here. One is asking if bylaws should have an act of God provision.
I don't know that I know exactly what you're referring to. it sounds to me like that language might parallel some of what's found in the emergency bylaws provisions. So you may want to check those out. And again, the citation for that, just get back here, is section 33-1031 is where that section begins in the Non-Stock Corporations Act. Anything further, Rebecca?
So, yep, we've gotten a few more come in. One from Ann Astorita asking, for summer interns, can we transport them together if we're supplying them with masks and gloves?
So right now I wouldn't, and let's see what happens after May 20th, because right now as a business, I'm not sure how much we should really be quote unquote operating. So to me, being together in a vehicle, the proximity that involves would say no, at least through May 20th, but after May 20th, that analysis would change. And, again, I'm not your insurance agent and I'm not acting as your attorney, but that's just my gut there, is that until the stay-at-home order is lifted and we're thinking about whether or not we can congregate in groups that aren't related or sharing the same house, that we really ought to be cautious about creating situations where we're in close quarters in a work responsibility. So I have heard of some organizations that are allowing employees to come in, usually making an assessment of the facilities that are available, the space that's available, thinking about staggering times and scheduling that, but allowing a limited number of employees to be in the same building at the same time. So, I think it's very case by case and subject to, what your capacity is to do something like that. But I would encourage you always to take a look at the guidance that's out there. Check it with your agent if you have questions about that, and think about first and foremost protecting your employees.
Great. We did have a question. I don't know if you have any more that you want to cover specifically on insurance, Connie, or if we want to just open up to regular questions, to general questions.
You know what, I have one more slide and then I had a question slide at the end. So let's see if we can get through it and then we can have general question time until our time is out.
Excellent.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so just one more slide, and that is really on what the board should be doing now. And I want to kind of bring us back to my remark at the beginning of the presentation that everyone is really experiencing this in a different way, and I think it is important that we accept people's comfort level during this time. So, some people will definitely feel the need to be working. They have extra time. They want to be productive. They want to be outside. Others are going to want to be very conservative. They might be in a risk category or live with somebody who is. And some people might be quite busy with work requirements, and when I say work, I mean non-land trust work, there are other professional requirements, and also with their home life. Getting groceries takes a long time now. Some people have increased childcare responsibilities while their kids are home from school. So there are must-dos, and then there's a lot of opportunity and flexibility. And so I just wanted to put it out there. The duties of the board always are the duty of care, the duty of loyalty and obedience. And here, the most relevant one of those is the duty of care. The board must be informed and act as appropriate to what it is hearing. about the organization and the information that it has, make decisions that are, based on full information. And they have the very strong fiduciary duties of providing financial and programmatic oversight. So if the board is not apprised of what's going on financially with the organization, that's a problem. They should be regularly updated on the financial status of the organization and also what the organization is doing programmatically. And I would say that, as far as what the board must do, to me, the top ones would be they must, take some time to think about how they're going to keep their staff and the users of their properties, if they have public properties, safe. How are they going to ensure or do the best that they can to mitigate any risks that are associated with those activities. They must monitor their properties. So before the end of the year, we should all make provisions to at least monitor the properties that are under our oversight, so our easements and our fee properties. The board should be ensuring that working procedures are implemented, so that kind of goes back to that first bullet, that staff and users are safe. Keeping an eye on the finances. They want to make sure that the organization is communicating. Your constituents do want to hear from you. They're not expecting nothing. They are expecting, if they're donors, if there are people who have been engaged with your organization, they do want to know what you're doing and how it's going for you. And Judy Anderson's presentations for CLCC have been really helpful in that regard. And then, on the flip side, I think there are some opportunities here that, we may be doing less physical programming, but what does that open up options for? It may be a good time to do more stewardship projects that, don't have to be accomplished in groups, some habitat restoration. It might be a really good time to think and do your strategic planning or do some acquisition strategy planning. And then, kind of on the other end of that, you may be looking outwardly and thinking about what your community needs and how you can best respond to those needs. So there are a lot of choices. And I think it's really important to note that while we're seeing, so much good activity from many, many land trusts all over the state, you don't have to do everything. So there are the must-dos, and then there are the can-dos. And somewhere in between, find the happy medium that you are able to do with your organization. So there's one more question that had come in prior to the call that I just wanted to address, and that was about succession plans for directors and what to be doing about that right now. I don't know if that maybe was answered in our discussion about annual meetings and whether or not you need to be thinking about electing directors. But I think that in general, this is a really hard time to recruit new board members. Although when we emerge from it, we might find that we've identified terrific new board candidates that are newly engaged people who were really previously unaware of our organizations and what they do. So with that, I'm going to just move to my questions slide. And I am available to stay on to answer any remaining questions that have come up.
So Connie, we've seen 2 questions come through. One is asking how long you need to hold on to certain organizational documents like your meeting minutes or your financial records.
Okay, so the short answer to that is meeting records forever, always. So don't get rid of those. And that goes for things like your list of board of directors, even when they change the prior lists, you should hold on to. Things like policies, even when they get revised, you should have your old policies as well. Keep those forever. Digital is sounding better and better all the time. And as far as financial records, those, you might want to check with your accountant, but generally the standard for financial documents is 6 years plus 1. for the statute of limitations, but that is not blanket across all financial documents. So, you know, that would be true, say, of your tax returns, but it might not be true of every single small piece of paper that you keep to substantiate your returns. Those might be able to be destroyed at an earlier time. So again, record keeping is kind of a topic all on its own. You know, there are some legal rules, there are some practical rules, and probably worth, you know, doing, you know, instead of trying to answer a quick question, doing a whole session on them.
Great. So Connie, just want to make sure you're seeing some of the thanks that are coming through the chat. This has been a helpful session for many people here. There was a question about engaging low activity directors. Perhaps that's an opportunity for this time.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back again to just say, like, I really think you have to meet people where they're at during this time. I think that it is really important to communicate with your directors. So if there are, you know, there are people who you haven't been in touch with on the board, it's a good time now to, you know, to reach out and to see how they're doing, and to explore opportunities for, you know, doing some organizational work or becoming more involved. Is that what low activity directors, are they directors who are, you know, have typically not done a lot for the organization, or are they people who don't walk around? I mean, I think we need to be conscious of, you know, what people might be going through. We need to help them engage if possible, and also understand that, you know, really our job is, you know, as directors of organizations that are meant to be perpetual. Our job is really to take care of this organization and ensure its sustainability as we pass it along. So as encouraging as I want to be about this idea that there are opportunities that are yet explored, I also just want to temper that by saying, you know, it's okay to have a period of lesser activity as long as you're hitting those must-dos. And you know, to make sure that we're caring out for ourselves and our people at the same time as we're planning for sustainability.
Awesome. I think that covers all of our questions, and I would be remiss if I didn't take a check at the time. It is 1:46. Don't tell Amy. But I did want to just thank Connie so much for her time and for pulling this all together. As you all can tell, this is really responsive programming. So we really appreciate you, Connie, taking the time to do all of this and putting it together so well. We also have a couple just quick announcements. You will get resources following this session, including the slides from this session, as well as a few of the different resources we've mentioned. On our website, we do have recordings from previous sessions, as well as the slides and different resources from those sessions as well. So please take a moment, check those out if you missed Judy's presentation or any of the other ones. They're up on our website, ready to go. We did want to make sure we said thank you to our 2020 conference sponsors, because they are a big part of why we're able to put on this programming, as well as all of you who registered for conference and allowed us to hang on to your registration to be able to put these things together. Finally, we have a few more sessions coming up, and we are creating a few as I speak. So please keep posted and check into our e-news to see the new sessions that may be coming up. But we have one next week on May 14th about mergers with Amy and Catherine Rawson from Weantenog. They will be talking about answering questions about mergers, talking about some opportunities there with the Peter and Carmen Lucia Buck Foundation for funding mergers at this time as well. And then in 2 weeks, on May 21st, Connie will be back again to talk about reworking your stewardship plan. So stay posted for those. And again, please feel free to just keep emailing us questions as needed. I'm happy to be responsive. And truly, thank you all for coming.
All right, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.